I'll marry you." The words left Nina Harper's lips before she could second-guess them. For a heartbeat, Street Dominic's cathedral fell silent. 300 guests, judges, contractors, political donors, and men whose tailored suits hid histories no one spoke about aloud turned in unison toward the young waitress standing beside the altar. 5 minutes earlier, Clara Devereaux had delivered her verdict. "I will not tie my life to a broken man." She had said it clearly, deliberately, loud enough for the reporters in the back pews to record every syllable. And then she had walked out. Now all eyes shifted to Nina. Vincent Moretti sat in his wheelchair beneath the vaulted ceiling, framed by stained glass saints washed in late afternoon light. His expression remained carved from stone, only his dark eyes moved slowly, measuring the woman who had just stepped into a storm not meant for her. "You understand what you're saying?" he asked quietly, his voice carried without effort. Nina swallowed. She understood hospital bills. She understood the sound of a 6-year-old struggling to breathe after climbing stairs. She understood fear that never slept. "Yes," she said. A murmur swept through the cathedral like wind through dry leaves. Vincent studied her for another long second. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and took her hand. The gesture alone stunned the room. His grip was warm, firm, not the weak, fragile hold of a man defeated. "Anthony," Vincent said calmly, without looking away from Nina, "have Mrs. Russo and the staff take her upstairs. Now." Anthony Russo blinked. "Upstairs?" "To the bridal suite," Vincent replied. "She deserves the dress." Gasps broke out across the pews. Clara, who had paused near the cathedral doors to witness the humiliation she believed she had orchestrated, turned sharply. "You can't be serious," she snapped. Vincent's gaze flicked to her once. Cool, detached. "I am always serious." He squeezed Nina's hand gently before releasing it. "Go with them," he said softly to her. Trust me. It was a dangerous request from a man whose reputation was built on calculated moves. Nina hesitated only a fraction of a second before allowing herself to be led down the side aisle. Her black server's apron suddenly felt heavier than it had minutes ago. Inside the bridal suite upstairs, chaos unfolded. Mrs. Russo, Anthony's wife, a dignified Italian woman in her late 50s, closed the door firmly and looked Nina over with sharp, assessing eyes. "Well," she said briskly, "we don't have time for tears." There were no tears anyway, only adrenaline. The silk gown Clara had abandoned lay draped over a velvet chair like a shed skin. It was breathtaking. Hand-stitched lace, cathedral-length veil, delicate embroidery that caught the light. Nina stared at it as though it belonged in a museum. "It doesn't belong to her anymore," Mrs. Russo said, reading her hesitation. "It belongs to the woman walking down that aisle." Within minutes, hands were working quickly. Apron removed, hair released from its loose knot and brushed into soft waves. Subtle makeup applied to highlight cheekbones and steady blue eyes. Someone slipped pearl earrings into her ears. When the gown was lifted over her shoulders, Nina felt something shift. Not fantasy. Armor. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not a waitress, not desperate. Strong, luminous, unafraid. Downstairs, whispers had escalated into outright disbelief. Clara remained near the entrance, pale with anger, as guests speculated openly. "She's making a fool of herself. He's lost his mind. This is damage control." Vincent waited at the altar, hands resting calmly on the arms of his wheelchair, outwardly composed. Inside, however, something unfamiliar stirred. He had expected compliance. He had not expected transformation. The cathedral doors at the rear of the sanctuary opened. Every head turned. Nina stepped into the light. The dress fit as though it had been tailored for her. The lace traced her shoulders gracefully. Her hair framed her face in soft gold waves. The sunlight from the stained glass illuminated her in hues of sapphire and crimson. A hush fell so complete it felt sacred. Clara's mouth parted in disbelief. Several guests actually rose from their seats. Vincent's breath caught just slightly. He had seen beautiful women his entire life. Wealth attracted beauty the way flame attracted moths. But this was different. Nina did not look ornamental. She looked resolute. She began walking down the aisle alone. No music played. No father escorted her. Just the quiet echo of heels against marble. Halfway down the aisle, Vincent did something no one expected. He pushed himself up. Gasps erupted. For a fraction of a second, He stood weight-balanced carefully, legs steady beneath him before settling back into the chair with controlled precision. The movement was subtle, quick, but Nina saw it, and so did Clara. Vincent did not look at Clara. He held out his hand to Nina. When she reached him, he took it firmly and drew her gently beside him. "You look," he began, then stopped. For the first time in years, Vincent Moretti found himself at a loss for language. "Beautiful," he finished quietly. A faint blush touched Nina's cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. The priest cleared his throat shakily. "Shall we proceed?" "Yes," Vincent said. The ceremony moved forward, stripped of excess but heavy with tension. "Do you take?" "I do." When it was Nina's turn, she did not glance at the pews or the reporters or Clara standing frozen in fury near the door. She looked only at Vincent. "I do." Anthony stepped forward with the rings originally intended for Clara. Vincent took the band between his fingers. Gold. Simple. Uncomplicated. He slid it onto Nina's hand with deliberate care. In that moment, something shifted in the cathedral. Not spectacle, not strategy, something quieter. When Nina placed the ring on his finger, her hands did not tremble. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. There was no applause, only stunned silence. Vincent lifted Nina's hand and pressed a brief kiss against her knuckles, not performative, not theatrical. Personnel. Then he turned the wheelchair toward the aisle. Nina walked beside him, not behind. As they passed Clara, Vincent did not slow. But Clara saw what everyone else saw. He had not been diminished. He had chosen. And Nina, once a waitress in a black apron, now walked out of the cathedral not as a replacement, but as Mrs. Vincent Moretti. Chicago would call it scandal. Vincent knew better. This was not desperation. It was a lesson, and Clara had just learned it the hard way. The cathedral doors had barely closed behind them when the noise began. Cameras flashed like lightning across the stone steps. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Microphones were thrust forward as security formed a human wall around the newly married couple. "Mr. Moretti. Was this planned? Mrs. Moretti, were you involved before today? Is this retaliation against Miss Devereaux?" Nina felt the weight of the new name before she fully understood it. "Mrs. Moretti." Vincent's hand remained wrapped around hers as Anthony maneuvered the wheelchair toward the waiting black Escalade. The late afternoon Chicago air carried the scent of exhaust and lake wind. The sky hung gray over the cathedral, heavy and watchful. "Eyes forward," Vincent murmured, without looking at her. "Don't rush. Walk like you belong here." She didn't trust her voice, so she nodded. The security detail closed the car doors with solid finality, cutting off the shouting. The interior of the SUV fell into insulated silence, tinted windows turning chaos into distant movement. For the first time since she'd said yes, Nina exhaled. Her reflection in the glass startled her. The gown still clung to her shoulders. The pearl earrings felt unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone with a different life. Vincent watched her carefully. "Are you regretting it already?" he asked. "No," she answered honestly. Then after a pause, "I'm trying to understand it." "That's reasonable." The vehicle pulled away from the cathedral, merging into late afternoon traffic as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Vincent loosened his grip slightly but did not release her hand. "Your daughter's name is Lily," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, she'll be admitted to Northwestern tomorrow morning. I've already made the call." Nina turned to look at him fully now. "You move fast." "I move efficiently." The corner of her mouth almost lifted at that. Outside, the city blurred past brick buildings, corner delis, elevated train tracks rattling overhead. Chicago looked the same as it had that morning, but nothing was the same. "Was this always your plan?" she asked quietly. Vincent's gaze shifted to the window. "Clara made her choice. I made mine. That's not what I meant." He turned back to her. "You're asking if I expected to marry a waitress today." "Yes." "No," he said evenly. "But I expected to be tested." She remembered the brief moment at the altar, how he had stood for a fraction of a second before settling back into the wheelchair. "You can walk," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. His expression did not change. "Careful. I saw you." Silence filled the vehicle, thick but not hostile. "Yes," he admitted finally. "I can." The words landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. "Then why?" "Because weakness reveals character." he interrupted calmly. The accident was real. The recovery was faster than expected. I chose not to announce it. To see who would leave, she finished. To see who would stay. If this story moved you, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I'd truly love to know. And if you believe loyalty and justice still matter in this world, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive. She looked down at their joined hands. And what am I? She asked. Proof? Strategy? His grip tightened slightly, not possessive, but deliberate. You're a woman who keeps her word. The Escalade turned into a tree-lined drive in Lake Forest, away from the noise of the city. Iron gates opened automatically, revealing a sprawling brick estate set back from the road. Nina's breath caught. She had grown up in a two-bedroom house with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. She had raised Lily in a modest South Side apartment above a laundromat. This was another world entirely. The SUV rolled to a stop beneath a covered portico. Staff members waited near the entrance, men in dark suits. An older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her posture rigid. Vincent released Nina's hand only to reposition himself carefully in the wheelchair. When the door opened, cool autumn air swept inside. Mrs. Moretti, the older woman said, her voice measured. Welcome home. The word struck Nina harder than anything else that day. Home. Vincent glanced at the woman. Mrs. Donatelli runs this household, he explained. She's been with my family 30 years. Mrs. Donatelli inclined her head slightly. We'll have your belongings transferred from your apartment this evening. That won't be necessary yet, Nina replied instinctively. Vincent's eyes flicked toward her. My daughter stays with me, she said calmly. Wherever I live. A pause. Mrs. Donatelli looked to Vincent for direction. She stays, Vincent said simply. No argument, no hesitation. Inside, the house smelled faintly of polished wood and espresso. Family portraits lined the walls, black and white photographs of stern-faced men and elegant women from another era. Nina stepped carefully across the marble foyer, aware that every movement was being observed. Dinner will be served at 7, Mrs. Donatelli said. Would you prefer to change first? Nina glanced down at the gown. Yes, she said quietly. Vincent studied her a moment longer. There's a suite prepared for you on the east wing, he said. You won't be disturbed. Separate rooms? She asked. For now. The answer felt both respectful and strategic. A maid led her upstairs. As she passed the top of the staircase, Nina paused and looked down. Vincent remained below in the foyer, framed by the tall windows overlooking the lake. Even seated, he commanded the space. He sensed her gaze and looked up. Something unspoken passed between them, not romance, not yet. Recognition. She disappeared down the hall. Alone in the grand foyer, Vincent let the mask slip for the first time that day. He pushed himself up slowly from the wheelchair. Standing fully now, he rolled his shoulders once, testing the familiar strength in his legs. There was no pain, no hesitation, only control. Anthony entered quietly from a side corridor. She's settled? Anthony asked. Yes. Anthony watched him stand without surprise. He had known the truth from the beginning. Clara's father is already calling city council members, Anthony said, trying to spin the narrative. Let him, Vincent replied. And the men? They saw what they needed to see. Anthony nodded. And her? He asked. Vincent looked toward the staircase where Nina had vanished. She doesn't know what she's walked into yet. Anthony studied him carefully. And you? Vincent allowed himself a slow breath. For the first time, he said quietly. I'm not entirely sure either. Upstairs, Nina stood alone in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment. She unfastened the pearl earrings and set them gently on the vanity. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Hospital billing department. She answered immediately. Mrs. Harper, the voice began. It's Mrs. Moretti now, she heard herself say. There was a pause on the other end. We've received confirmation of payment in full. Nina closed her eyes. Lily was safe. Downstairs, Vincent resumed his place in the wheelchair just as footsteps approached. The performance was not over, not by a long shot. By the time the sun dipped behind Lake Michigan, the headlines had already begun circulating. Mob boss marries waitress after bride walks out. Local news at 9 teased footage of Nina stepping from the cathedral in lace and pearls. Cable pundits speculated about revenge, desperation, optics. Social media did what it always did, reduced complex lives to cheap conclusions. Inside the Moretti estate, dinner was served precisely at 7. The dining room could have seated 20. Only 2 places were set. Nina had changed into a simple navy dress Mrs. Donatelli had quietly selected from a rack of new clothing already arranged in her suite. The efficiency of it unsettled her. Someone had anticipated her size, her measurements. Vincent waited at the head of the table, wheelchair positioned with mathematical precision. Candlelight flickered against crystal glasses and polished silver. "This feels unnecessary," Nina said softly as she took her seat to his right. "Tradition matters," Vincent replied, "especially on days when people are watching for cracks." She folded her hands in her lap, then unfolded them. "Is anyone not watching?" "Not in my world." The first course arrived: minestrone, steam curling gently into the air. Mrs. Donatelli supervised from the doorway like a general ensuring formation. Nina tasted the soup. It was rich, comforting, familiar in a way she hadn't expected. "My mother used to make something like this," she murmured. Vincent glanced at her. "Where did you grow up?" "Joliet." "Small house?" She gave a faint smile. "Very small." "My father believed in large houses," Vincent said. He thought size equaled respect. "And does it?" "No," he said simply. The honesty surprised her. Outside the tall windows, darkness settled over the lake. The estate lights reflected faintly against the water like scattered coins. "My daughter is staying with Mrs. Alvarez tonight," Nina said carefully. "She doesn't know everything yet. She'll move here tomorrow," Vincent replied. "That's not what I meant." He held her gaze. "I need her safe," Nina continued, "not surrounded by men with guns. She will be safer here than anywhere in Chicago." "That's not the same thing." Vincent leaned back slightly, studying her. She did not flinch under his attention. "You think I'm careless?" he asked. "I think power makes enemies." A corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "That's accurate." Silence lingered, but it wasn't hostile. It was cautious. 2 people mapping unfamiliar territory. "Why me?" Nina asked finally. "You were standing still." "That's not an answer." "It is," he said. Everyone else in that cathedral reacted, whispered, avoided eye contact. "You watched." "I was in shock." "No," he corrected gently. "You were assessing." The second course arrived: roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, asparagus prepared with exactness. "You think you read people well," Nina said. "I have to." "And what do you read when you look at me?" Vincent did not hesitate. Protective, stubborn, afraid, but not for yourself. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "You don't know me." "Not yet." The words landed with quiet weight. Upstairs, a staff member knocked discreetly before entering Nina's suite. Mrs. Donatelli oversaw the transfer of her modest belongings from the apartment: a suitcase, a box of children's books, a framed photograph of Lily with missing front teeth, and a gap-toothed grin. When Nina returned to her room after dinner, she found the photograph placed carefully on the bedside table. She touched the frame. This wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't Cinderella. It was a transaction built on need and strategy. But Lily's surgery had been scheduled. That mattered more than romance. Downstairs, in his private study, Vincent stood. Anthony closed the door behind them. "The Devereaux family is furious," Anthony said. "They're threatening to pull development contracts." "Let them try," Vincent replied calmly. "You want me to move against them?" "Not yet." Anthony studied him. "You could have chosen anyone today." "I didn't choose anyone," Vincent corrected. "I chose her." Anthony raised a brow. Vincent moved toward the window, looking out over the dark water. "Clara thought I was diminished," he said. "She wanted spectacle. She got it." "And Nina?" "She wanted survival." Anthony nodded slowly. "Different currency." "Yes." Upstairs, Nina's phone buzzed again. "Mrs. Alvarez." "She saw you on TV," the older woman said breathlessly. "The whole block saw you." Nina sank onto the edge of the bed. "How's Lily?" "Asleep." "But honey, what did you do?" Nina closed her eyes. "I made a decision." "Is he dangerous?" The question hung heavy. "Yes," Nina answered honestly. But not to her. After the call ended, she stood and walked toward the window. From this height, the lake looked endless. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Vincent's voice followed. May I? She hesitated only a moment before opening the door. He was in the wheelchair again, always in the chair when others could see. Yes, she said. He entered slowly. I wanted to clarify something, he began. You will never be forced into anything physical. This arrangement remains on your terms. The straightforwardness disarmed her. And your terms? She asked. Loyalty, he replied. Public unity. No surprises. She studied him carefully. And if I change my mind? About the marriage? Yes. Then we dissolve it quietly, he said. But not before your daughter's surgery. Fair, too fair. You don't strike me as generous, she said. I'm not, he agreed. I'm strategic. She almost smiled. And what am I? She asked again. His eyes softened just slightly. You're someone who stepped forward when it cost you something. That answer lingered in the room. Good night, Nina, he said. Good night, Vincent. The use of his first name paused him briefly. He inclined his head and exited. When the door closed, Nina leaned against it and let herself breathe fully for the first time all day. Downstairs, Vincent remained awake long after the house had gone quiet. He removed the wheelchair's footrests and set them aside. He stood in the dim light of his study, legs steady, shoulders squared. He had tested the woman he thought he loved and watched her fail. Today, unexpectedly, he had married a woman who had nothing to gain except security for her child. That kind of motivation was dangerous, because it was honest. He looked toward the staircase again. Somewhere upstairs, his new wife was trying to understand the world she had entered. For the first time in months, Vincent felt something unfamiliar. Not control. Not dominance. Uncertainty. And uncertainty, he knew, was either the beginning of weakness or the beginning of something else. Morning arrived quietly over Lake Michigan, pale light spilling through tall windows and settling across the polished floors of the Moretti estate. Nina woke before the alarm on her phone. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The mattress beneath her was too soft, the ceiling too high, the air too still. Then she saw Lily's photograph on the bedside table, and she remembered everything. Mrs. Moretti. The title felt borrowed. She showered quickly, choosing a simple cream blouse and dark slacks from the wardrobe that had appeared overnight. The clothes fit perfectly. Efficient, thoughtful, calculated. Downstairs, the house was already awake. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the hallway. Somewhere, a radio played low classic Sinatra, warm and nostalgic. Nina paused at the staircase. Vincent sat at the breakfast table in the smaller dining room this time, sunlight illuminating his profile. A newspaper lay folded beside his plate, headline bold across the front page. Moretti marries Waitress in stunning cathedral reversal. He looked up as she entered. You're early, he observed. I don't sleep well in unfamiliar places. You'll adjust. She wasn't sure whether that was reassurance or prediction. Mrs. Donatelli pulled out a chair for her without comment. The older woman's expression remained professionally neutral, but Nina sensed scrutiny beneath it. Breakfast was simple scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit. Lily's admission is at 10, Vincent said, pouring coffee. The cardiologist will meet you personally. You're coming? Nina asked before she could stop herself. Yes. A pause. You don't have to, she added quickly. I know. The simplicity of that answer unsettled her more than obligation would have. She picked up the newspaper and scanned the article. The tone was sharp, but not hostile. Speculation dominated the column: revenge marriage, strategic optics, emotional impulse. They think this is about Clara, she said. Everything is about narrative, Vincent replied. Truth rarely matters. And what's the truth? He met her gaze steadily. That remains to be seen. After breakfast, the Escalade carried them back into the city. Traffic moved thick and impatient along the highway. Chicago's skyline rose ahead, glass towers catching the morning light. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, security presence was discreet but unmistakable. Anthony had already arranged for private access through a side entrance. Inside, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and coffee, the universal scent of worry. Nina's steps quickened. Lily sat in a waiting chair beside Mrs. Alvarez, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw her mother, her face lit up. Mommy, Nina dropped to her knees, hugging her tightly. It's okay, she whispered into her daughter's hair. Everything's going to be okay. Lily pulled back and looked up at Vincent curiously. Is that him? She asked bluntly. Children did not care about reputation. Yes, Nina said softly. This is Vincent. Vincent lowered himself carefully into the wheelchair's most natural posture. Hello, Lily, he said. I've heard you're very brave. I am, she replied confidently. I just don't like needles. Neither do I, he said gravely. She studied him for a long second, then nodded in approval. He's not scary, she informed her mother. Nina exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The cardiologist arrived shortly after, a calm man in his 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. Mrs. Moretti, he began. The name echoed again. Mrs. Harper, she corrected gently. Vincent did not comment. The consultation was thorough. Risks explained. Recovery outlined. Nina listened with sharp focus, absorbing every detail. Vincent remained quiet but attentive, asking pointed questions about post-operative care and long-term monitoring. The doctor answered him respectfully. When paperwork was presented, Nina reached instinctively for her pen. Vincent placed his hand over hers, not stopping her, just steadying. It's covered, he said quietly. She signed anyway, because motherhood required participation, not spectatorship. After Lily was prepped for preliminary tests, Nina sat beside Vincent in the quiet corridor. Thank you, she said, voice low. For what? For not making this feel transactional. He studied her carefully. It is transactional, he said honestly. But that doesn't mean it lacks integrity. She looked at him. Is that how you justify everything? Yes. She didn't know whether to admire that or fear it. Across the corridor, a television mounted on the wall replayed footage from the cathedral. Clara's face flashed briefly across the screen, indignation frozen mid-sentence. Nina felt a flicker of something, not jealousy, not insecurity. Awareness. Does she know you can walk? Nina asked quietly. Vincent's gaze hardened. No. And when she finds out, she'll understand the cost of underestimating me. There it was. Steel beneath composure. Later, after Lily was settled and smiling weakly from a hospital bed decorated with cartoon stickers, Nina stepped into the hallway to breathe. Vincent joined her. You're stronger than most men I know, he said. She gave a tired, half smile. I don't have the luxury of not being. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to distant monitor beeps and quiet footsteps. You don't owe me gratitude, he added. I know. And I don't expect affection. That's good. A faint hint of amusement touched his expression. Honesty is refreshing, he said. Get used to it. On the ride back to Lake Forest, the city felt different, less overwhelming, more deliberate. You understand, Nina said carefully, that if anyone threatens her, if this world touches her, I won't hesitate. To what? He asked. To leave. He nodded slowly. Understood. That answer meant more than promises would have. Back at the estate, as dusk settled once more over the lake, Nina walked through the house with clearer eyes. This wasn't a palace. It was a fortress, and fortresses came with walls for protection and imprisonment alike. In his study that evening, Vincent removed the wheelchair footrests again. He stood alone in the dim light, thinking. He had expected control. He had expected compliance. He had not expected a woman who negotiated terms for her daughter without flinching. Upstairs, Nina sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her wedding ring. It gleamed under soft lamplight. She hadn't married for love. She hadn't married for status. She had married for survival. But survival, she was beginning to realize, required trust. And trust in a man like Vincent Moretti was either bravery or recklessness. Outside, the lake remained still. Inside the house, two people lay awake in separate rooms, bound by contract and consequence. Neither yet understood that what had begun as strategy was slowly becoming something far more dangerous. Choice. By the end of the week, Chicago had chosen its version of the story. Some called Nina a gold digger. Others called her clever. A few, quieter voices called her brave. Vincent called her predictable. Predictable in the best way. Every morning, she was up before 7. She checked on Lily at the hospital before breakfast, even when doctors assured her the surgery would not be scheduled for another 10 days. She spoke respectfully to staff, but never timidly. She observed more than she spoke, and she never once asked Vincent for anything beyond what had already been agreed upon. On Sunday afternoon, the Moretti estate filled with cars, black sedans, dark SUVs, engines idling a moment longer than necessary before shutting off. "Family dinner," Mrs. Donatelli informed Nina as she adjusted the placement of silverware. "Every Sunday. Non-negotiable." Nina stood in the kitchen doorway, watching men in tailored suits step through the front entrance with the familiarity of habit. Some were in their 40s, some in their 60s. All carried themselves with a particular kind of quiet authority. This was not a social gathering. It was an inspection. Vincent sat at the head of the long dining table when the men were finally assembled. The wheelchair placed exactly as always. His posture was composed, shoulders squared, hands resting calmly on the armrests. Anthony stood slightly behind him, watchful. Nina entered the room wearing a simple forest green dress. Nothing extravagant, nothing apologetic. Conversations dipped the moment she stepped forward. "Gentlemen," Vincent said evenly, "you've met my wife." A few nodded politely. Others barely concealed their skepticism. One man, gray hair, heavy gold ring, thick accent softened by decades in America, leaned back in his chair. "Quick ceremony," he observed. "Unexpected. Life rarely consults us before it changes," Vincent replied. A low hum of acknowledgement passed around the table. Nina took the empty seat beside Vincent. She felt every eye measure her. "You understand," the gray-haired man continued. "Our concern is stability." "Stability remains intact," Vincent said calmly. The man's gaze dropped briefly to the wheelchair. "And perception?" Vincent did not look down. "Perception," he said quietly, "is a tool." Silence settled like dust. Nina felt the tension but did not shrink from it. "My daughter's surgery is next week," she said, her voice steady. "I appreciate your understanding." The men glanced at one another. Personal details were rarely shared at this table. Vincent turned his head slightly toward her. "You don't owe explanations," he murmured. "I'm not explaining," she replied softly. "I'm stating facts." The gray-haired man studied her with new interest. "Family matters," he said after a moment, "that we respect." Dinner was served, lasagna layered thick with ricotta and basil, garlic bread still steaming, red wine poured generously. The conversation shifted to contracts, shipping routes, city permits. Nina listened carefully. She understood enough to recognize coded language without needing translation. Halfway through the meal, one of the younger men's sharp suit, sharper eyes leaned forward. "With all due respect," he said, "optics matter. Our rivals see weakness." Vincent's expression did not change. "Do they?" he asked. The man gestured lightly toward the wheelchair. "They see opportunity." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something small but calculated. He removed his hands from the armrests and placed them flat against the table. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself upward, not fully, not standing tall, but enough that his legs bore weight for a suspended second before he settled back down. The movement was subtle, intentional. Only those watching closely would have caught it. Every man at that table had been watching closely. The younger man went still. Vincent's gaze sharpened. "Opportunity," he said calmly, "is often a misunderstanding." No one spoke after that. Dinner resumed. Later, as guests filtered out and engines roared softly down the long driveway, Nina stood near the window overlooking the lake. "You didn't have to do that," she said without turning. "Do what?" "Prove anything." Vincent rolled closer. "I didn't prove anything," he replied. "I reminded them." She faced him now. "They don't know you can walk." "They know enough." She studied him. "You're not just testing loyalty," she said. "You're cultivating fear. Fear maintains order." "And love?" she asked before she could stop herself. He held her gaze. "Love complicates it." Upstairs, Lily's voice echoed faintly through the hall as Mrs. Donatelli showed her the guest suite that would temporarily become her bedroom once discharged. Nina listened to her daughter's laughter, a sound that felt fragile and precious. "She likes the house," Nina said quietly. "I'm glad. You don't have to be involved," she added. "After the surgery, I choose to be," he replied. The word choose lingered. Across the estate grounds, wind stirred the surface of the lake. In the distance, thunder rolled softly, storm clouds gathering beyond the horizon. Anthony stepped into the foyer, phone pressed to his ear. He caught Vincent's eye and gave a subtle shake of his head. "Not good." Vincent moved toward him. "What is it?" Nina asked. "Nothing that concerns you," Vincent said automatically. She folded her arms. "It concerns you." That concerns me. Anthony lowered the phone. Devereaux met with Calderon this afternoon, he said quietly. Calderon, rival territory. Ruthless. Opportunistic. Their positioning, Anthony continued. Trying to exploit the wedding. Vincent's expression hardened, not angry. Focused. Let them posture, he said. Anthony hesitated. They're spreading rumors, he added, about your condition. Nina felt the room shift. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. Rumors are currency, he said evenly. We decide their value. Anthony nodded and stepped away to make further calls. Nina studied Vincent carefully. Is this the part where things get dangerous? She asked. He met her eyes fully. This is the part where they try. A pause. And you? She pressed. He didn't look away. I never try. Upstairs, Lily's laughter echoed again. Downstairs, tension settled in the air like approaching rain. Nina realized something in that moment. She had married a man who lived in perpetual chess moves, but she had also married a man who had chosen to attend her daughter's hospital appointment without being asked. Both truths existed. Both mattered. You know, she said quietly. If you'd told Clara you could walk, none of this would have happened. Vincent's gaze shifted briefly toward the darkened window. If she needed me standing to stay, he replied. She was already gone. The answer carried no bitterness, only certainty. Thunder rolled louder over the lake. Storm clouds thickened across the sky. Nina looked at her wedding ring again. It no longer felt like borrowed armor. It felt heavier, not with obligation, with consequence, outside. The first drops of rain began to fall against the tall windows of the Moretti estate. Inside, alliances shifted quietly beneath polished surfaces. The world had seen a scandal. What it hadn't yet seen was the storm that would follow. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain lashed against the tall windows of the Moretti estate, wind rattling the glass hard enough to make the chandeliers tremble faintly. Lightning flashed across Lake Michigan, illuminating the water in violent white streaks before plunging everything back into darkness. Nina woke at the first crack of thunder. For a split second, she forgot where she was. Then she heard Lily's small voice from the adjoining room. Mom? Nina was on her feet immediately. She crossed the hallway barefoot, pushing open the guest room door. Lily sat upright in the oversized bed. Stuffed rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. It's just a storm, Nina said gently, climbing onto the edge of the mattress. Big houses make storms sound louder. Lily frowned. Does he get scared? Who? Your husband. The word still felt strange. Nina smoothed her daughter's hair back from her forehead. No, she said softly. He doesn't scare easily. Another flash of lightning split the sky. Downstairs, in the dim light of his study, Vincent stood at the window. He had abandoned the wheelchair hours ago once the house quieted. The storm outside reflected faintly against the glass, his silhouette tall and unmoving. Anthony stood near the doorway. They're testing shipments on the South Docks, Anthony said. Calderon's people. Vincent didn't turn. Let them, he replied. They're pushing to see if we retaliate. Vincent's voice remained even. We don't react to noise. Anthony hesitated. And Devereaux? Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. Clara's father doesn't understand what he's aligning with. You think she does? Vincent looked out at the storm. No, he said quietly. She never understood anything beyond appearances. Upstairs, Nina waited until Lily drifted back to sleep before slipping out of the room. As she moved down the hallway, she noticed light spilling from beneath Vincent's study door. She paused, then knocked lightly. A beat of silence. Come in. She opened the door slowly. Vincent was seated in the wheelchair again, positioned behind his desk as if he'd never moved from it. Papers lay spread neatly across the surface. A crystal glass of untouched whiskey sat to one side. Anthony glanced at Nina, then at Vincent. I'll update you in the morning, Anthony said quietly before leaving the room. When the door closed, silence settled between them. You don't sleep? Nina asked. Eventually, she stepped further inside. The storm woke Lily, she said. She asked if you get scared. And what did you tell her? That you don't. Vincent's gaze held hers. And do you believe that? She considered the question carefully. I believe everyone gets scared, she said. Some people just hide it better. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the room. Vincent leaned back slightly in the chair. "You should go back upstairs," he said. "This doesn't concern you." She crossed her arms. "You keep saying that. It's true." "No," she replied calmly. "It's convenient." A faint crease formed between his brows. "Calderon is posturing because of the wedding," she continued. "Because they think you're weak." He didn't answer. "And Clara's family is feeding that narrative," she added. "You're perceptive," he said. "I'm observant." The difference mattered. He studied her for a long moment. "You're not afraid?" he asked. "Of what?" "Of being attached to a target." She thought of Lily asleep upstairs, of hospital corridors and heart monitors. "I've been afraid for years," she said quietly. "Fear doesn't change decisions. It just clarifies them." The words lingered. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer now. Vincent rose slowly from the wheelchair. This time, he didn't bother hiding it. He stepped around the desk deliberately, standing tall under the dim lamplight. Nina did not react. "You knew," he said. "I suspected. And you're not angry?" She tilted her head slightly. "Should I be? I deceived everyone." "Yes," she agreed. "You did." Another flash of lightning illuminated his face. "And yet," she continued, "you told me the truth when I asked." He searched her expression carefully. "Because you're not part of the performance," he said. "Then stop performing," she replied quietly. The room went still. No one spoke over Vincent Moretti, not in that tone. But she hadn't spoken with defiance. She had spoken with clarity. "You think I enjoy this?" he asked. "I think you're used to it." His shoulders stiffened slightly. "You built a world where strength is currency," she said. "Now you're trapped maintaining it." He stepped closer. "Trapped?" he repeated. "Yes." The word hung between them. Thunder cracked directly overhead. Nina didn't flinch. "You could have told Clara the truth," she said softly. "You wanted to see if she'd stay. I needed to know. And now you do." "Yes." "Does it feel better?" He didn't answer immediately. The storm pounded against the windows. "No," he said finally. The admission was quiet, unvarnished. Nina studied him, this man who commanded rooms without raising his voice, who controlled narratives like chess pieces, who had chosen her in front of 300 witnesses. "You're not as untouchable as you pretend," she said gently. His gaze darkened. "And you're not as powerless as you were," he replied. Silence again. Not hostile. Measured. Down the hallway, Lily stirred faintly but did not wake. Vincent walked back toward the desk, his steps steady. "You don't have to carry this alone," Nina said quietly. He paused. "I always have." "That doesn't mean you should." The storm began to ease gradually, thunder retreating into the distance. Vincent lowered himself back into the wheelchair, almost thoughtfully. "You realize," he said, "if Calderon pushes harder, this stops being noise." "I assumed that," she replied. "And you're still here." "Yes." "Why?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I don't run when things get difficult." He watched her closely. "You ran from Joliet," he said. "I ran toward something better," she corrected. The distinction mattered. Outside, rain softened to a steady rhythm. "You should sleep," he said at last. "So should you." "I will." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing," she said. He looked up. "If someone threatens Lily." "They won't," he interrupted. "If they do," she finished calmly, "you won't have to protect me. I'll protect her." His eyes held something unreadable for a moment. "I know," he said quietly. She left the study without another word. Vincent remained still long after she was gone. The storm had passed, but the air felt different, clearer. He had expected fear from her. He had expected hesitation. Instead, he had found steadiness. Upstairs, Nina slipped back into bed, listening to the softened rain against the roof. She had married a man who ruled through control. Tonight, for the first time, she had seen the edges of what control cost him, and somewhere between strategy and survival, something subtle had shifted. The storm outside had faded, but the one gathering in Chicago was only beginning. The morning after the storm felt unnaturally calm. Lake Michigan lay smooth and silver beneath a pale sky, as if the violence of the night before had been imagined. Sunlight filtered across the terrace, catching on the wrought iron railings and warming the stone beneath Nina's bare feet. She stood outside with a mug of coffee, breathing in the cool air before the house fully woke. Inside, Lily was still sleeping. For now, the world felt ordinary. Vincent joined her without announcement. He rolled the wheelchair beside her, hands resting loosely on the armrests, expression unreadable. "You're up early again," he observed. "So are you. I don't sleep well when it rains." She glanced at him. "Storms don't scare you." "No," he said. "But they remind me of what I can't control." She took that in quietly. Below them, a black sedan pulled through the gates and came to a stop near the front entrance. Anthony stepped out, jaw tight. "That's not routine," Nina murmured. "No," Vincent agreed. Anthony entered the house quickly and reappeared on the terrace minutes later. "They hit one of our trucks," he said without preamble. Vincent didn't react outwardly. "Injuries?" he asked. "Minor. Driver's shaken. Cargo's gone." "Calderoni?" Anthony nodded once. Nina felt the temperature shift despite the sun. "They're escalating," Anthony added. Vincent's gaze moved across the lake, distant but calculating. "They want a response," he said. "They're baiting you," Nina said quietly. Both men looked at her. Anthony didn't mask his skepticism. Vincent did not dismiss her. "They believe you won't move quickly," Anthony said. "Because of the wedding. Because of optics." Vincent turned the wheelchair toward the house. "Schedule a meeting," he said. "Not retaliation." Anthony blinked. "A meeting? With Calderon? That's risky." "Everything is." Anthony hesitated, then nodded and stepped away to make the call. Nina remained where she was. "You're not going to strike back?" she asked. "Not yet." "Why?" Vincent studied her. "Because force is loud," he said. "And sometimes, silence is more threatening." She folded her arms. "Or it looks like weakness." He didn't smile. "That depends on who's watching." By noon, Chicago buzzed quietly with rumors. Word of the hijacked shipment spread through the city's private channels like smoke through cracks in a wall. Nina sat beside Lily's hospital bed that afternoon, brushing her daughter's hair back gently while nurses checked vitals. The surgery was 2 days away. 2 days. Vincent stood near the window of the hospital room, posture straight despite the chair beneath him. "You don't have to stay," Nina said softly. "I'm staying. You have a meeting. It can wait." She looked at him. "This world of yours doesn't usually wait." He met her gaze. "It does when I say it does." That answer unsettled her in ways she couldn't fully name. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Vincent's phone vibrated. "Anthony." "It's set," he said after answering. "Tonight. Private warehouse on Ashland." Nina felt her stomach tighten. "You're going," she said. "Yes. And if it's a trap?" He didn't hesitate. "Then I'll adjust." She stepped closer. "Vincent." He paused. "Be careful," she said simply. For a moment, something softened in his expression. "I always am." But she had lived long enough to know that careful men still bled. The warehouse sat dark and silent beneath flickering industrial lights. Vincent arrived in a convoy of 2 vehicles. Anthony exited first, scanning the perimeter. Inside, the space smelled of oil and dust. Calderon waited near the center of the warehouse floor, flanked by 2 men. He was older than Vincent by perhaps a decade, broader, less refined. His smile never reached his eyes. "Well," Calderon said, spreading his hands slightly. "You came." Vincent rolled forward, stopping several feet away. "You wanted to talk." Calderon's gaze dropped briefly to the wheelchair. "Chicago's changing," he said. "Leadership too." Vincent's expression remained composed. "Say what you mean." Calderon stepped closer. "People think you're distracted." Soft. A faint, almost imperceptible shift moved through Vincent's posture. "People think many things," he said calmly. "You get married overnight." Calderon continued. "You don't retaliate when we test your roots." That smells like hesitation. Vincent's voice remained level. "You stole a truck," he said. "You didn't test me." Calderon chuckled. "Then why are you here?" Vincent's gaze sharpened. "Because I wanted to look you in the eye before you make your next mistake." Silence rippled across the warehouse floor. Calderon's smile thinned. "And what mistake would that be?" Vincent leaned forward slightly, confusing restraint with incapacity. Anthony watched closely as Vincent's hands gripped the arms of the wheelchair. Calderon tilted his head. "Then show me," he said quietly. For a long, suspended second, no one moved. Then Vincent stood, fully, without rush, without apology. The warehouse went still. Calderon's expression faltered for half a heartbeat before smoothing. "So," he murmured, "the rumors aren't true." Vincent stepped forward slowly. They were never meant to be. The message was unmistakable. Calderon studied him carefully now, not with mockery, but recalculation. "You're playing a dangerous game," Calderon said. Vincent's voice was calm. "I've been playing it longer." A tense silence stretched. Finally, Calderon exhaled. "The truck was a message," he admitted. "Nothing more." Vincent's gaze hardened. "Then hear mine." He stepped closer. "You don't touch what's mine again." Calderona held his stare, then nodded once. The meeting ended without gunfire, without raised voices. But the balance had shifted. Back at the estate, Nina sat in the dim kitchen with Mrs. Donatelli long after Lily had fallen asleep. The older woman poured tea quietly. "You worry," Mrs. Donatelli observed. "Yes, he survived worse. That doesn't mean he always will." Mrs. Donatelli looked at her carefully. "You care more than you planned to," she said. Nina didn't deny it. Headlights swept across the front windows shortly after midnight. The front door opened. Vincent entered, uninjured, composed. Nina stood immediately. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She studied him, searching for cracks. He met her eyes. "It's handled." She nodded once, relief flooding through her. "Good." They stood facing one another in the quiet kitchen. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "They were testing perception, and they won't do it again." She exhaled slowly. "Storms pass," she said softly. He stepped closer. Not all of them. Outside, Lake Michigan remained still beneath the moonlight. But beneath Chicago's calm surface, alliances had shifted. And somewhere, in the quiet space between contract and commitment, something deeper than strategy was beginning to form. 2 days before Lily's surgery, the house felt suspended between prayer and preparation. Nina moved through the morning with deliberate calm. She braided Lily's hair slowly, fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. The hospital bag sat packed by the door: pajamas, slippers, the worn stuffed rabbit, and a small framed photograph of the two of them at Navy Pier 3 summers ago. Vincent watched from the doorway. "You've done this before," he said quietly. "Not heart surgery," she replied, "but hospitals, waiting rooms, bills you pretend not to fear." He absorbed that without comment. By noon, Chicago's air had turned humid and heavy, clouds gathering low and gray over the skyline. Anthony stepped into the foyer with a folded expression. "There's movement," he said. Vincent didn't ask from where. Devereaux met with Calderon again this morning. Nina's stomach tightened. "Clara's father?" she asked. Anthony nodded. Vincent's voice was steady. "He's miscalculating. Or positioning," Anthony countered. Vincent looked at Nina briefly, then back at Anthony. "Increased security at the hospital." Nina stiffened. "No." Both men turned to her. "No visible security," she clarified. "You surround that hospital with your men, and it turns into a headline." Vincent's jaw set. "She's right," Anthony admitted reluctantly. "Too public." Vincent considered it. "Discreet," he decided. "Unmarked. Out of sight." Nina nodded once. That she could accept. That evening, as the sky deepened toward dusk, a black sedan rolled slowly past the estate gates. It didn't stop. It didn't need to. Anthony noticed. So did Vincent. "Message?" Nina asked. "Probably," Vincent said calmly. "From who?" "Someone who wants us uneasy." Nina folded her arms. "Is it working?" He looked at her carefully. No, but she wasn't entirely convinced. At 6:40 the next morning, they arrived at the hospital. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and coffee. Nurses moved briskly. Machines hummed softly in patient rooms. Lily wore a pale blue hospital gown and tried to smile bravely. "I don't like this part," she whispered. Nina knelt in front of her. "I know," she said gently. "But brave doesn't mean not scared. It means doing it anyway." Lily glanced at Vincent. "Will you wait too?" she asked him. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'll be right outside." The surgical team arrived. Forms were signed. Time slowed. When they wheeled Lily down the corridor, Nina walked beside her until the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel," only forced her to stop. The doors closed. Silence pressed in. Vincent sat beside her in the waiting area, hands clasped loosely. "How long?" she asked. 3 to 4 hours. he said softly. She nodded. Then she stood and began pacing. After an hour, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, Mrs. Moretti. The voice was smooth, familiar. Clara. Nina's spine straightened. What do you want? She asked evenly. Just checking in, Clara said lightly. He must be distracted today. Nina's voice remained calm. Say what you called to say. A soft laugh on the other end. You married a man who belongs to a world that consumes people like you, Clara said. I just thought you deserved to know that the people circling him don't see you as permanent. Nina glanced at Vincent, who watched her closely. Are you finished? Nina asked. Not quite. My father doesn't appreciate being humiliated. There's a difference, Nina replied quietly, between humiliation and consequence. The line went silent for half a breath. You think he chose you? Clara continued, sharper now. You were convenient. Nina didn't flinch. Yes, she said simply. And I chose him back. Silence, then the line disconnected. Vincent's eyes searched her face. Clara? He asked. Yes. What did she say? That she regrets nothing. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. She should, he said. 2 hours passed, then 3. Nina's pacing slowed. Her thoughts turned quieter, heavier. Why didn't you tell her the truth? She asked suddenly. Vincent knew what she meant. Because love that depends on proof isn't love, he said. She looked at him. And what if she'd stayed? Then I would have known she loved the illusion. The answer was honest, painfully so. Finally, a surgeon approached. Mask lowered, expression measured. The procedure went well, he said. There were no complications. Nina's knees nearly gave out. Vincent steadied her instinctively, his hand firm at her elbow. She'll be in recovery for a few hours, the doctor continued. But everything looks strong. Strong. The word felt sacred. When they were finally allowed to see Lily, she lay small and pale beneath white sheets, monitors blinking steadily beside her. Nina kissed her forehead gently. You did it, she whispered. Vincent stood at the bedside. You were brave, he said quietly. Hours later, as evening settled over the city, Nina stepped into the hallway for air. Vincent followed. She'll be okay, he said. Yes, Nina whispered. Then she turned to him. Clara's father met with Calderon again. He didn't look surprised. They're aligning, she said. Yes, and you're not retaliating. No. Why? Vincent held her gaze. Because they expect reaction. And when men expect anger, patience unsettles them. She studied him, and if patience costs you something, he didn't hesitate. Then I pay. The simplicity of that answer frightened her. Not Lily, she said firmly. Never Lily. Their eyes locked. Something unspoken passed between them, no longer purely contractual, no longer entirely strategic. A choice. Later that night, as Lily slept peacefully in recovery, Nina sat beside Vincent in the dim waiting room. The television overhead replayed news segments about shipping disputes along the docks. Calderon's name floated quietly beneath speculation. Vincent reached for her hand without looking at her. She let him. Outside the hospital windows, Chicago pulsed quietly with life cars moving, lights flickering, alliances shifting in the dark. Inside, a man who had built his empire on silence and control sat beside a woman who had married him for survival. And for the first time since the cathedral, neither of them felt like they were pretending. Thank you, Nina said softly. For what? For not letting this world swallow today. He looked at her. It doesn't get to. Not while he had breath. Not while she had courage. The surgery had succeeded. But the war beneath the surface of Chicago had not ended. It had only paused. Lily came home 5 days later. The house felt different with her laughter in it, lighter, warmer. Less like a fortress and more like something that resembled a home. Nurses moved quietly through the halls for the first 48 hours, checking vitals, adjusting medication, ensuring the transition from hospital to estate went smoothly. Vincent had cleared his schedule entirely. Anthony noticed. The organization noticed. Chicago noticed, but no one said a word. Nina stood at the kitchen island watching Lily carefully spoon soup into her mouth, determination written across her small face. I can do it myself, Lily insisted. I know you can, Nina replied gently. Vincent sat nearby, reviewing documents but glancing up every few seconds. You're hovering, Nina said softly. I'm observing. That's hovering with a better vocabulary. A faint smile touched his mouth. Later that evening, when Lily finally fell asleep in the guest suite turned temporary recovery room, Nina walked the dim hallway alone. She found Vincent in the study again. The wheelchair was positioned perfectly behind the desk, the performance intact. "You don't have to do that when it's just us," she said quietly. He looked up. "Habit," he replied. She closed the door behind her. "She called again?" Nina said. His expression hardened. "Clara?" "Yes." "What did she want?" "To remind me that you don't belong to me." Silence settled like a weight between them. "And what did you tell her?" he asked carefully. "That people aren't property." His gaze shifted slightly. "She's escalating because she's losing leverage," he said. "Or because she thinks she still has it." Vincent stood slowly, stepping out from behind the desk. "I'm not interested in revenge," he said. Nina tilted her head slightly. "That's not what you said in the cathedral." A long pause. "Humiliation isn't revenge," he replied quietly. "It's correction." She studied him. "Correction for what?" "For mistaking me." The words carried history. The door to the study opened abruptly. Anthony entered without knocking. "That was reckless," he said immediately. Vincent didn't turn. "What was?" "Calderon met with Devereaux tonight. Publicly." Nina's pulse quickened. "Publicly?" she repeated. "Charity gala," Anthony confirmed. "Photos everywhere." Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "They're building narrative," Anthony continued. "Positioning you as unstable, impulsive. Because I married a waitress," Nina said evenly. Anthony didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes." Vincent looked at her then, not with embarrassment, not with apology, with calculation. "They want you to react," Anthony added. "And you're not going to," Nina said. Vincent's gaze sharpened. "No." Anthony exhaled sharply. "They'll read that as weakness." "Let them," Vincent replied. Anthony looked between them, frustrated but loyal. "Security around Lily increases tonight," he said firmly. Nina stepped forward. Discreetly, Anthony nodded once. When he left, silence returned. "They won't stop," Nina said. "No." Vincent agreed. She folded her arms. "Then why are you waiting?" He walked to the window, staring out at the dark water beyond the estate. "Because when you strike too early, you teach them your limits. And when you wait too long, you teach them your patience." She moved closer. "And what if they mistake patience for mercy?" Vincent turned to face her fully. "I don't offer mercy." There it was again. Steel beneath restraint. The next morning, the news cycle shifted. Headlines questioned Vincent's leadership. Speculation about weakened alliances flooded social media and financial blogs. A photo of Clara and her father laughing beside Calderon trended online. Nina saw it before Vincent did. She stood in the breakfast room holding her phone. "They're calling this strategic realignment," she said quietly. Vincent scanned the screen once. "Is it?" "No." "Then it's noise." She studied him carefully. "You really don't care what they say." "I care who believes it." "And do they?" He didn't answer immediately. Anthony entered with a tablet in hand. "Two of the smaller syndicates are hesitating," he said. "They're watching." Vincent nodded once. "Schedule a meeting." "Public?" Anthony asked. "No," Vincent replied. "Visible." That afternoon, a convoy of black vehicles moved through downtown Chicago toward one of the oldest restaurants in Little Italy. Not hidden, not discreet, Vincent entered through the front door, the wheelchair visible, Anthony at his side, and Nina walking beside him. The room fell silent as they approached the private dining area, where representatives from 3 smaller syndicates waited, men who respected power more than promises. Vincent positioned himself at the head of the table. Nina sat to his right, not behind, not secondary, beside him. The men exchanged glances. "You look well," one of them ventured carefully. Vincent's voice remained calm. "I am." "And the rumors?" another asked. Vincent folded his hands. "Rumors are useful," he said. "They tell you who wants you to fail." A beat of silence. "And who wants that?" someone pressed. Vincent's eyes cooled. "Anyone who mistakes my restraint for surrender." Nina watched the shift in the room. Confidence returning, alignment recalibrating. One of the men leaned forward. "Calderon's moving aggressively." Vincent nodded. "He is. And he'll regret it." The certainty in his tone carried weight. Not anger, not bluster. Certainty. Dinner lasted 2 hours. When they left, Phones across the city buzzed with quiet updates. Moretti had appeared, calm, unshaken, present. Back in the car, Nina exhaled slowly. That was deliberate, she said. Yes. You needed them to see you. Yes. And me? He looked at her. They needed to see you too. Why? Because they need to understand I don't make impulsive decisions. She absorbed that. So I'm part of your strategy. You're part of my life, he corrected. The words landed heavier than he likely intended. That evening, as they returned to the estate, headlights flashed behind them briefly before disappearing down a side road. Anthony noticed. Vincent noticed. Nina did too. They're watching, she murmured. Let them, Vincent replied. Inside the house, Lily slept peacefully. Nina stood over her daughter's bed for a long moment. You brought her into this, she said quietly when she rejoined Vincent in the hallway. No, he replied. They did. And what happens if this turns into more than narrative? Vincent stepped closer. Then I stopped being patient. She searched his eyes. And when that happens, he didn't hesitate. Chicago will remember who I am. A chill moved through her, not fear of him, but fear for what would follow. Outside, the lake remained calm. Inside, alliances had begun to shift back into place. But somewhere in the dark corners of the city, pride and resentment were hardening into something far more dangerous. This wasn't over. It had only begun to tighten. The first shot wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to warn. The bullet shattered the rear window of Vincent's SUV just as it turned onto Sheridan Road, glass exploding inward like a violent burst of rain. Nina's scream was instinctive, her body already moving toward Lily in the back seat before she consciously understood what had happened. Down, Anthony shouted from the front. The driver swerved hard, tires screeching as a second shot cracked through the air. Vincent's hand gripped Nina's shoulder, forcing her lower without hesitation. Stay down, he ordered. Voice calm but lethal. Two black SUVs behind them accelerated, cutting off the pursuing vehicle. Engines roared. Another gunshot echoed, then silence followed by the violent squeal of metal against pavement somewhere behind them. Within seconds, the Moretti convoy had shifted formation, boxing in the threat. The Escalade sped forward. Nina's heart pounded so hard she thought she might black out. Lily, she gasped. I'm okay, Lily cried, trembling but unhurt. Vincent's eyes were sharp, calculating, scanning. Anthony, he said evenly. Handled, Anthony replied into his phone. Vehicle disabled. Driver apprehended. The SUV did not slow until it reached the estate gates. When they finally rolled to a stop inside the compound, Nina's hands were shaking. Vincent exited first, not in the wheelchair. He stepped out fully, scanning the perimeter, posture rigid with contained fury. Nina noticed, and so did every guard present. Anthony approached quickly. Single shooter, he reported. Amateur. Hired. By who? Nina demanded. Anthony hesitated. Calderon's people, he said. But the money trail leads to Devereaux, Vincent finished quietly. Silence fell heavy in the driveway. Nina felt the weight of what that meant. Clara, this wasn't narrative anymore. This was escalation. Vincent turned to Nina. Take Lily inside. She didn't argue. Inside the estate, Lily clung to her mother, eyes wide. Was that fireworks? She whispered. Nina swallowed hard. No, she said gently. It was someone being very foolish. She knelt down, holding her daughter's face in her hands. You're safe, she said firmly. You hear me? You are safe. Upstairs, after Lily was settled with a glass of water and the reassurance of locked doors, Nina returned to the main hall. Vincent stood near the fireplace, hands braced against the mantel. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't pacing. He was still, which was far more dangerous. Anthony remained nearby. This crossed a line, Anthony said. Vincent's voice was low. They aimed at my car. Yes, they knew my daughter was inside. Anthony nodded once. Nina stepped closer. Your daughter? She repeated quietly. Vincent turned toward her. My daughter, he corrected. The word hit her harder than the gunshot had. Anthony's phone buzzed again. The shooter's talking, he said. Payment came through an intermediary, cleaned, but the pattern's clear. Vincent's eyes went cold. No more patience, Anthony added. Vincent nodded slowly. No more patience. Nina felt something shift permanently in the room. What are you going to do? she asked. He met her Gaza. End it. There was no bravado in his tone, just inevitability. That night, Vincent didn't retreat to the study. He stayed in the main living room. Lights low. Security doubled. Nina sat across from him, watching him think. You said you don't offer mercy, she said softly. I don't. But this... She gestured toward the dark windows. The guards moving outside. This is war. Yes. And wars don't end cleanly. No. She held his gaze. I won't let Lily grow up in crossfire. She won't. You can't promise that. I can. The certainty in his voice was unshakable. How? She pressed. Vincent stepped toward her. By making sure no one ever mistakes my restraint again. Anthony re-entered the room. Calderon's warehouse on Pulaski, he said quietly. We have leverage. Vincent didn't hesitate. Tonight. Nina's breath caught. Vincent, he looked at her. If I don't respond now, they'll try again, he said evenly. And next time, they won't miss. The truth in that silenced her. An hour later, the estate felt emptier. The convoy had departed. Vincent had left, not in the wheelchair. Anthony had insisted on body armor. Vincent had agreed. That frightened Nina more than anything. She stood at the upstairs window long after the headlights disappeared. Mrs. Donatelli approached quietly. He'll return, the older woman said. You sound certain. I've seen him survive worse. Nina's voice trembled slightly. Not when it involved a child. Jesus. Donatelli didn't argue. Across the city, the Pulaski warehouse lit up under floodlights. Calderon's men barely had time to react. Vincent entered through the front. Not stealth, not subtle. Direct. Calderon stood in the center of the warehouse floor, fury written plainly across his face. You've lost your mind, Calderon snapped. Vincent walked toward him slowly. You aimed at my family, Calderone scoffed. That wasn't. Vincent grabbed him by the collar and slammed him back against a steel support beam. The movement was swift, controlled. You miscalculated, Vincent said quietly. Calderon struggled, but Vincent's grip didn't falter. I didn't order that hit, Calderon insisted. Devereaux did. He wanted leverage. Vincent's eyes narrowed. You let it happen. Calderon didn't deny it. Anthony stepped forward. We've frozen your docks, he informed Calderon calmly. Every shipment. Calderon's confidence flickered. This will cost you, he warned. Vincent released him abruptly. It already has. He stepped back. By sunrise, Vincent continued. Your operations are mine. Calderon stared at him. You think you can just take them? I don't think. Vincent replied evenly. I do. Back at the estate, Nina paced the hallway outside Lily's room. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, just past 3 a.m., headlights returned. The front door opened. Vincent entered. Uninjured, but different. The calm had sharpened. It's over, he said simply. Nina studied him. What does that mean? It means no one will aim at my car again. Anthony stood behind him. Silent confirmation. She stepped closer. You could have killed him. I didn't need to. Why? Vincent looked at her fully. Because humiliation lasts longer. The echo of the cathedral lingered between them. Revenge wasn't loud in his world. It was precise. Upstairs, Lily shifted in her sleep. Vincent glanced toward the staircase. They won't come near her again, he said. Nina searched his face. And Clara? His jaw tightened slightly. She'll learn the cost of aligning with the wrong man. Outside, Chicago's skyline glowed faintly against the early morning sky. Power had shifted, decisively, but war always left residue. And Nina understood now, truly understood, that loving Vincent Moretti meant standing beside a man who would burn entire empires before letting harm reach his door. The question was no longer whether she was afraid. The question was whether she was ready. Chicago woke to silence, not the ordinary quiet of early morning, but the kind that follows a shift in power. By sunrise, 3 of Calderon's primary docks were under new management. Contracts had been transferred overnight. Key personnel had resigned voluntarily, according to paperwork. Financial accounts had frozen, then reopened under different signatures. No gunfire, no headlines, just precision. Vincent stood on the terrace overlooking the lake, coffee untouched beside him. Nina joined him quietly. You didn't sleep, she observed. I did enough, She watched the water for a moment before speaking. Is he finished? Calderone? Vincent asked. Yes. He's diminished. That's not the same thing. Vincent glanced at her. No, it's not. She studied him carefully. And Devereaux? His expression shifted subtly. Devereaux miscalculated, he said. He put my daughter in danger? Nina replied softly. Vincent's jaw tightened. Yes. Inside. Lily's laughter drifted faintly down the hallway. A nurse was helping her walk carefully from the bed to the chair. Recovery was slow but steady. Life inside the estate continued. Life outside had changed. Anthony entered the terrace, tablet in hand. Devereaux requested a meeting, he said. Vincent didn't blink. Public or private? Private. Nina felt her pulse quicken. He's afraid, she said. He should be, Vincent replied. Anthony hesitated. He's bringing Clara. Silence fell. Nina's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. Vincent's voice was calm. Tonight, he said. The meeting was set for the Devereaux family estate, a sprawling property north of the city. Old money architecture and manicured lawns meant to signal permanence. Vincent insisted Nina remain home. She refused. This started with me, she said evenly. I won't hide now. He studied her. This won't be pleasant. I didn't expect it to be. Anthony drove. The sky hung low and gray as they pulled through iron gates guarded by private security. Inside the grand foyer, marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. Clara stood near the staircase, poised, beautiful, composed, but her eyes betrayed tension. Her father, Richard Devereaux, waited in the formal sitting room. He rose when Vincent entered. You've been busy, Devereaux said coolly. Vincent rolled forward. You've been reckless. Clara's gaze flickered to Nina. So you came, she said lightly. Nina held her stare. Yes. Devereaux motioned for everyone to sit. This escalation benefits no one, he began. You aimed at my car, Vincent interrupted calmly. Devereaux's expression hardened. I did not. You financed someone who did. A long pause. Devereaux exhaled. You overreacted. Vincent's eyes went cold. They shot at my daughter. The word hung in the air. Clara's composure faltered slightly. I didn't know about that, she said quickly. Vincent didn't look at her. You aligned with a man who would use a child as leverage, he said to Devereaux. That's not oversight. That's negligence. Devereaux folded his hands. You humiliated my family. Vincent's voice remained even. You humiliated yourself when you mistook appearance for strength. Silence stretched. Nina watched Clara carefully. There was something different in her expression now, not arrogance. Regret. You lied, Clara said suddenly, turning toward Vincent. You made me believe you were broken. I gave you the truth you chose to see. He replied calmly. You tested me. Yes. And when I failed, you replaced me with a waitress. The word was sharp. Nina didn't flinch. Vincent's tone sharpened slightly. I replaced you with a woman who stayed. Clara's face paled. Devereaux leaned forward. What do you want? He asked Vincent. Distance, Vincent said simply. You sever ties with Calderone, publicly. Devereaux's eyes narrowed. That's not realistic. Vincent leaned forward slightly in his chair. Neither is the idea that I won't dismantle what remains of his operations by next week. The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Clara stood abruptly. You're punishing us, she said. No, Vincent replied. I'm correcting you. Nina recognized the echo of his earlier words. Correction. Devereaux's jaw tightened. You'd ruined decades of partnership over a misunderstanding? Vincent's gaze hardened. You misunderstood who I am. Silence settled heavily. Finally, Devereaux exhaled slowly. You'll have your distance, he said. Calderone is finished. Vincent nodded once. That's wise. Clara's eyes shifted to Nina. You think you've won, she said quietly. Nina met her gaze steadily. This was never a competition. Clara's voice cracked slightly. You married him for money. Yes, Nina replied calmly. And he married me for strategy. Silence. And then? Clara demanded. Nina didn't look away. And then we chose each other anyway. The words lingered in the room. Vincent's eyes flickered briefly toward Nina. Devereaux rose. This ends here, he said firmly. Vincent stood, fully. The movement was deliberate. Clara's breath caught. You see, she whispered. You weren't broken. Vincent's expression didn't soften. "No," he said. "You just didn't look closely enough." They left without another word. In the car, silence stretched between them. Anthony drove carefully through the darkened roads. Nina finally spoke. "You didn't destroy them." "No." "Why?" Vincent looked out the window. "Because humiliation is enough." She studied him. "And if it isn't? Then they'll learn twice." Back at the estate, Lily slept peacefully. Vincent stood beside her bed for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall steadily. Nina joined him quietly. "Is it over?" she asked softly. "For them," he said. "For us?" He turned toward her. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether we keep pretending this is still just a contract." Her heart skipped. "You don't want it to be?" she asked. He stepped closer. "I stopped wanting that weeks ago." She searched his face. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you deserved the choice." The word echoed again. Choice. Downstairs, the estate was quiet. Chicago's skyline shimmered faintly beyond the lake. War had been avoided. Power had been reclaimed. But something deeper was shifting now, no longer about reputation or dominance. About truth. Vincent reached for her hand. "Whatever this becomes," he said quietly, "it won't be strategy." Nina's pulse quickened. "And what will it be?" He didn't hesitate. "Real." The house felt different after the meeting at the Devereaux estate. Not quieter, clearer. For the first time since the cathedral, the air inside the Moretti estate did not carry the weight of imminent threat. Security remained tight. Guards still rotated shifts. Anthony still monitored movement across the city. But something fundamental had shifted. Calderon had withdrawn. Devereaux had severed ties. And Clara had disappeared from headlines as quickly as she had once dominated them. 3 weeks passed without incident. Lily's recovery improved steadily. She could walk short distances without assistance now, her small hand gripping Nina's fingers as they moved slowly across the terrace in the afternoons. Vincent often joined them, sometimes in the wheelchair, sometimes not, only within the estate walls. On a cool Sunday evening, as autumn crept quietly into Chicago, Nina found Vincent in the library. He stood near the window, a leather-bound book open in his hand. "You read poetry," she said softly. He didn't look surprised that she had noticed. "Occasionally. That's not what people expect from you." "I'm aware." She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. "You've been different," she said. "How?" Quieter." He set the book down. "Less reactive," she clarified. He studied her. "War requires noise," he said. "Peace requires discipline." "And which do we have?" "Peace," he replied. "For now." She moved closer. "And us?" The question lingered between them. Vincent exhaled slowly. "I don't want you to feel obligated," he said carefully. "You entered this marriage for Lily." "Yes. And I entered it for leverage." "Yes. But that's not what this is anymore." She held his gaze. "No," she agreed. He stepped closer. "Then I need to know," he said quietly. "If you're staying because you choose to." Her heart beat harder. "You think I haven't chosen already?" "I don't assume." She took another step toward him. "You stood up in a cathedral and married me when everyone thought you were broken," she said. "You risked war to protect my daughter. You gave me space to decide." A pause. "And you think I'm here out of obligation?" He searched her face carefully. "I need to hear it." She swallowed. "I'm here because I want to be." Silence. Then something softened in his expression, not relief. Gratitude. He reached for her hand. "You deserve honesty," he said, "and you don't usually give it freely." "Not freely," he admitted, "but now I do." She studied him. "Then tell me something true." He didn't hesitate. "I was afraid," he said quietly. Her brows lifted slightly. "Of what?" "That if I told you how I felt, you'd think it was strategy." The admission was unvarnished. She stepped closer still. "And what do you feel?" His voice lowered. "You're not convenience," he said. "You're not leverage. You're not optics." He paused. "You're home." The word hit her harder than any confession could have. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Nina did something small and deliberate. She reached up and kissed him, not for cameras, not out of gratitude, but because she wanted to. The kiss was slow, careful, real. When they pulled apart, Vincent rested his forehead lightly against hers. "This isn't temporary," he said quietly. I know. And if staying with me means living in this world? She didn't hesitate. Then we shape it differently. Downstairs, Lily's laughter echoed faintly as she watched a cartoon in the sitting room with Mrs. Donatelli. Life, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Later that evening, they sat together on the terrace. No phones, no meetings, just the lake stretching out before them, dark and endless. Do you regret it? Nina asked softly. The accident? He clarified. No, the test. He was silent for a long moment. I regret the way it ended, he said finally, but not the clarity it gave me. And Clara? He looked out over the water. She loved what I represented. And I don't? You see me. The difference mattered. A breeze moved gently across the lake, cool and steady. Inside the house, Lily's footsteps echoed lightly down the hallway. Vincent's hand rested over Nina's. Contracts can end, he said quietly. Vows don't have to. She smiled faintly. You're suggesting we renegotiate? I'm suggesting we remove the expiration date. Her heart tightened. You're asking for permanence. I'm offering it. She searched his face carefully. Even if it costs you? It already has, he said softly, and I don't regret the price. She leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time, the estate didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like something built, together. In the days that followed, Chicago's undercurrent remained steady. No retaliation, no provocations. Devereaux maintained distance. Calderon retreated into smaller operations. And Vincent no longer needed to demonstrate strength through spectacle. One evening, as Nina tucked Lily into bed, her daughter looked up at her sleepily. Is he staying? Lily asked. Yes, Nina said softly. Good, Lily murmured. He looks at you like he's scared to lose you. Nina smiled faintly. He doesn't scare easily. Not of storms, Lily replied. Just of you. Downstairs, Vincent stood in the study once more. The wheelchair sat near the desk. He looked at it thoughtfully. Then, without ceremony, he pushed it aside. When Nina entered a moment later, she noticed. You're done pretending, she said. Yes. For everyone? For anyone who matters. She stepped closer. And what about the ones who don't? His expression hardened slightly. They'll adjust. The city outside shimmered quietly beneath the night sky. Power no longer needed to roar. It simply existed. Vincent took Nina's hands gently. This started as survival, he said. And now? Now it's choice. She met his gaze steadily. Then choose me, she said softly. His answer was immediate. I already did. The contract sat in the center of Vincent's desk like a relic from another life. Thick paper, legal clauses, a 3-year term, with precise language outlining financial terms, public expectations, and a clean dissolution. Nina stood across from him in the study, sunlight filtering through tall windows and casting long lines across the polished floor. You kept it, she observed quietly. I keep everything, he replied. Even things you don't intend to use? He held her gaze. Especially those. She walked around the desk slowly, stopping beside him. The wheelchair was no longer positioned behind the desk. It remained against the far wall, unused unless necessary. You said you wanted to remove the expiration date, she reminded him. Yes, and this is the expiration date. He nodded once. For a long moment, neither of them touched the document. 3 years. That had been the agreement. Security for Lily. Distance at the end. Clean. Controlled. But nothing about the past months had remained clean or controlled. Once we tear that up, Nina said softly, there's no pretending anymore. There hasn't been for a while, Vincent replied. She studied him carefully. You're sure? He didn't hesitate. I don't make permanent decisions lightly. And marrying me wasn't light? A faint smile touched his mouth. That was strategy. And this? He reached for her hand. This is choice. The word settled between them again. Choice had become the foundation of everything. Nina picked up the contract. The paper felt heavier than it should have. This protected me, she said quietly. It did. It gave me control. And now? He asked gently. She looked up at him. Now I don't need protection from you. The distinction mattered. Without another word, she tore the document in half. The sound echoed softly through the study. Vincent watched her carefully as she tore it again. And again. No hesitation. No regret. When the pieces lay scattered across the desk, he stepped forward. This doesn't change who I am. he said quietly. I know. It doesn't make my world safer. I know. And it won't always be easy. She met his gaze steadily. I didn't marry you for easy. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, not uncertain, solid. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a steadiness that felt different from before. Not strategic, not cautious, certain. Downstairs, Lily's voice floated faintly through the hallway as she worked through homework at the kitchen table with Mrs. Donatelli. Life continued, ordinary in its small details, extraordinary in its foundation. Later that evening, Anthony arrived with a stack of documents and a raised brow. I hear congratulations are in order, he said dryly. Vincent glanced at Nina. She made the call, he said. Anthony's expression softened slightly. Then it's official? It was official the day she stood beside me in that cathedral, Vincent replied. Now, it's permanent. Anthony nodded once. Then there's one more thing. Vincent's posture sharpened. What? Anthony placed a photograph on the desk. Clara, leaving a downtown hotel, with a man Vincent recognized instantly. Not Calderon. Someone worse. Marcus Ivers, a quiet financier who operated far from public view. Strategic, ruthless, patient. He's been circling, Anthony said. Not publicly, but consistently. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. And Clara? Nina asked quietly. Anthony hesitated. She's not the architect, he admitted. She's leverage. Vincent exhaled slowly. Ivers doesn't move without reason, he said. He sees opportunity, Anthony replied. Calderon's weakened. Devereaux is exposed. He might think you're distracted. Vincent's gaze flicked briefly to Nina. Let him think that. Nina stepped closer to the desk. If he's using Clara, he is, Vincent said calmly. She'll get hurt. Vincent's voice hardened slightly. She made her choices. Nina held his gaze. Just like we did. The room went quiet. Anthony cleared his throat. I'll monitor Ivers' movements, he said, discreetly. When he left, Nina remained still. You don't care what happens to her, she said quietly. Vincent looked at the photograph again. I care that she doesn't drag us into another war. That's not what I meant. He met her eyes. She aligned herself against me. Yes, but she didn't aim at your car. The reminder hung in the air. Vincent's expression shifted subtle, but real. You think I should warn her. I think you should close the chapter cleanly. He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I'll handle it. The next afternoon, Vincent arranged a meeting. Neutral ground. A quiet cafe in the Gold Coast, public enough to prevent spectacle, private enough for conversation. Clara arrived alone. She looked different, less polished, less certain. You wanted to see me? She asked coolly. Yes. She sat across from him, eyes scanning his posture. You're standing now, she observed. Yes, and you're not pretending anymore. No. Silence stretched. Ivers is dangerous, Vincent said without preamble. Clara's eyes narrowed. You're warning me? I'm informing you. She laughed softly, but it lacked confidence. You think I don't know what I'm doing? I think you're reacting, he replied evenly. Not choosing. Her expression faltered slightly. He understands ambition, she said defensively. He understands leverage. She held his gaze. You don't get to protect me. I'm not protecting you, Vincent said calmly. I'm closing a door. Silence lingered between them. You loved me once, she said quietly. Yes. And now? Now I understand you. The honesty in that answer left no room for interpretation. Her eyes flickered hurt, pride, regret tangled together. You humiliated me, she whispered. You humiliated yourself, he replied gently. I just refused to hide it. She looked away. Be careful, he added quietly. Ivers doesn't play for spectacle. He plays for ownership. Clara swallowed. I'm not naive. No, Vincent said softly. You're stubborn. A faint, sad smile flickered across her face. That's what you liked about me. Yes. And what do you like about her? She asked. Vincent didn't hesitate. She stays. The answer was simple and final. Clara stood. You were never broken, she said. No, he replied. You just never looked long enough. She walked away without another word. When Vincent returned to the estate that evening, Nina waited on the terrace. Well? She asked quietly. It's done, he said. She searched his face. Clean. As clean as it can be. The sun dipped low over Lake Michigan, casting gold across the water. You didn't destroy her, Nina said. No. Why? Vincent stepped beside her. Because revenge ends things loudly, he said. And I prefer quiet conclusions. She slipped her hand into his. And us? She asked softly. He turned toward her fully. We're not a conclusion, he said. We're a beginning. The lake stretched out before them, vast, steady, endless. For the first time, the war wasn't outside their walls. It wasn't in contracts or alliances or rival families. It was gone. What remained was choice, and they had made it. Chicago did not erupt when Marcus Ivers made his move. That was the difference between men like Calderon and men like Ivers. Calderon fired guns. Ivers moved numbers. 2 weeks after Vincent's meeting with Clara, 3 of Moretti's legitimate businesses were flagged for federal audit. Shipping permits were delayed. Bank transfers slowed without explanation. A construction project downtown stalled after an anonymous complaint triggered a review. No bullets, no threats, just pressure. Anthony placed the file on Vincent's desk late Friday evening. This isn't random, he said. It's coordinated. Vincent scanned the documents calmly. Ivers, he said. Yes. Nina stood near the fireplace, listening. They can't find anything, Anthony continued. Everything's clean. That's not the point, Vincent replied. He's testing endurance. Anthony nodded. He wants you distracted. Vincent's gaze shifted briefly toward Nina. He won't get it. Anthony hesitated. There's something else. Vincent looked up. Ivers met with Clara again yesterday. Nina exhaled slowly. And? She looked unsettled. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. She made her choice, he said evenly. Anthony left shortly after, phone already to his ear. Silence filled the study. This isn't over, Nina said quietly. No, Vincent agreed. But it's not war, she added. Not yet. She stepped closer to the desk. He's not attacking your power. He's attacking your stability. Vincent looked at her carefully. He wants to make me reactive. And you won't be. No. But you also won't ignore it. His lips curved slightly. No. The next morning, Vincent attended the audit meeting in person, not in the wheelchair. He walked into the downtown office building alone, wearing a dark suit and carrying nothing but a slim leather folder. The federal agents were polite, professional, thorough. Vincent answered every question without irritation. He provided documentation without hesitation. By the end of the meeting, it was clear there was nothing to find. But that hadn't been Ivers' objective. When Vincent returned home, Nina was on the terrace with Lily, helping her practice careful steps without assistance. Vincent paused for a moment, watching. Lily laughed when she stumbled and caught herself. See? Nina said warmly. You're stronger than you think. Vincent stepped forward. Progress, he observed. Lily grinned. I didn't fall. You don't scare easily, he said gently. She beamed. After Lily went inside for lunch, Nina turned to Vincent. He's escalating. Yes, and you're calm. For now. She studied him. What does calm look like in your world? Preparation. That afternoon, Vincent called a quiet meeting not with enforcers, with accountants, lawyers, city planners. He didn't strike back. He fortified. By evening, permits were expedited. Banking channels diversified. Partnerships strengthened. Ivers was subtle. Vincent was patient. That night, Nina found him alone in the study once more. You're not angry, she said. I am, but you're not acting on it. He leaned back slightly. Anger makes mistakes. And love? She asked softly. Love makes priorities. The answer lingered. You're choosing us over pride, she said. He didn't deny it. Ivers wants me chasing shadows, he said. I won't give him the satisfaction. And Clara? She's collateral in his game. Nina hesitated. Do you think she knows that? Vincent was quiet for a moment. Yes. And she's too proud to admit it. Later that evening, Nina received a call. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Hello? Silence for half a second. Then Clara's voice. He's not what you think, Clara said quietly. Nina's posture stiffened. Ivers? Yes. Why are you calling me? Because Vincent won't listen. Nina moved into the hallway for privacy. What's happening? Clara's voice wavered slightly. He's freezing accounts, leveraging contracts. He says, it's business. And And he wants Vincent desperate. Nina's jaw tightened. Why tell me? Silence. Because I was wrong, Clara said finally. About a lot of things. The admission was fragile. What do you want? Nina asked. For him to be careful. Nina studied the empty hallway, heart steady. He always is. You don't understand, Clara pressed. Ivers doesn't confront. He erodes. I know. Another pause. I didn't know about the shooting, Clara whispered. I would never have. I know, Nina said quietly. It was the first time she'd said it. Clara exhaled shakily. He thinks he can break him, she said. He can't. Nina replied. Why are you so sure? Because Vincent doesn't break, Nina said softly. He adapts. When Nina told Vincent about the call, he listened without interruption. She warned you, he said. Yes, he nodded once. That means she's afraid. Should we be? Nina asked. Vincent stepped closer. Ivers attacks systems, he said. Not people. But systems collapse. Only if you build them weak. He rested his hands lightly on her shoulders. I'm not Calderon, he said quietly. And I'm not Devereaux. I know. And I'm not afraid of Ivers. Should you be? He held her gaze. No. The following week, Ivers made one final attempt. A hostile takeover bid on one of Vincent's public-facing companies. Calculated. Legal. Public. Vincent responded within hours. Not with aggression. With acquisition. By midnight, he had purchased controlling interest in two of Ivers' smaller subsidiaries through quiet third parties. No press. No spectacle. Just repositioning. When Ivers realized what had happened, it was too late. The erosion reversed. The pressure eased. And the message was unmistakable. You don't destabilize a man who builds foundations deeper than your reach. On the terrace that night, Nina leaned against Vincent as the wind moved gently across the lake. Is it finished? She asked. Yes. For real? For now, he corrected. She smiled faintly. You don't believe in permanent endings. No, he admitted. I believe in sustained strength. She studied him. You could have crushed him. Yes. Why didn't you? Vincent looked out across the dark water. Because strength isn't loud, he said. It's consistent. She slipped her hand into his. And what are we? He turned toward her. We're not strategy anymore. We're not leverage. We're not optics. He paused. We're choice. Inside the house, Lily's laughter drifted faintly down the hallway again. Life. Uninterrupted. Unbroken. Chicago remained what it had always been: complicated, competitive, relentless. But within the walls of the Moretti estate, something had settled. Not peace, not complacency, but clarity. They had begun with survival. They had endured war. They had dismantled pride and rebuilt trust. And now, standing side by side beneath a quiet sky, they understood something deeper than power. They had chosen each other, and that choice had become stronger than any threat. Winter arrived early that year. By late November, Lake Michigan had turned steel gray, wind cutting sharp across the terrace and rattling the bare branches along the estate's long driveway. The Moretti house felt warmer, in contrast fires lit in the evenings, the scent of cinnamon and baked bread drifting from the kitchen where Mrs. Donatelli insisted on cooking proper food for cold weather. Inside those walls, life had settled into something almost ordinary. Lily returned to school part-time. Her strength improved each week. The nurse's visits became less frequent. The sound of her laughter filled rooms that once echoed. Vincent adjusted his schedule without announcement. He was home for dinner. Every night, Nina noticed. You're reorganizing your empire around a 9-year-old's bedtime, she said one evening as they cleared plates from the dining table. I'm reorganizing my priorities, he corrected. She smiled faintly. And what would the old Vincent say about that? He'd call it a liability. And the new one? He stepped closer. He'd call it an investment. The distinction lingered. Outside their walls, Chicago remained restless but quiet. Ivers had retreated after the failed takeover. Calderon's name faded into irrelevance. Devereaux maintained distance, measured and careful. But power vacuums never remained empty for long. One Friday afternoon, Anthony entered the estate with a look Nina had learned to recognize. Not alarm. Concern. There's talk, he said once they gathered in the study. Vincent leaned back slightly in his chair. About? You? Vincent raised an eyebrow. There's a perception, Anthony continued carefully, that you've softened. Nina felt the shift immediately. Because he didn't burn the city down? She asked coolly. Anthony didn't react. Because you chose diplomacy over destruction, he clarified. Because you've been visible at school events. Because you've been seen without the chair. Vincent was silent. They think domestic life made you predictable. Anthony finished. Nina folded her arms. They think wrong. Vincent's expression remained composed. Who's leading this narrative? Anthony hesitated. A younger faction. Independent operators. They weren't around when you took over. Vincent nodded slowly. They didn't see what I'm capable of. No, Anthony agreed. And that's the problem. Silence settled. Nina stepped closer. What are they planning? Nothing concrete, Anthony replied. Yet, Vincent rose from his chair deliberately. Schedule a dinner, he said. Anthony blinked. A dinner? Yes. With who? Everyone who's forgotten. The following Saturday evening, the Moretti estate filled with black cars once again. But this wasn't a Sunday ritual. This was deliberate, calculated. The younger operators arrived cautiously, men in their 30s and early 40s. Sharp suits, sharp ambitions. Eyes scanning for weakness. Vincent greeted them at the door. Standing, no chair, no apology. Nina stood beside him. Not behind, not ornamental. Present. Dinner was served in the formal dining room. Long table illuminated by soft golden light. Conversation began politely. Business, market shifts, regulatory pressures. Then one of the younger men leaned back in his chair. With respect, he said evenly. The city's changing. Vincent nodded once. It always is. Some of us think it's time for a more aggressive stance. Against who? Vincent asked calmly. Anyone who tests us. Nina watched carefully. They've tested you, another added. And you didn't retaliate. Vincent's gaze cooled slightly. Didn't I? The men exchanged glances. Calderon's still breathing, one pointed out. Vincent leaned forward slightly. He's irrelevant. Because you let him be. Vincent stood slowly. The room went quiet. You mistake silence for surrender, he said evenly. You mistake patience for weakness. He walked slowly around the table, posture straight, presence controlled. When I retaliate, he continued. It doesn't make headlines. He stopped behind the young man who had first spoken. It makes vacancies. The room chilled. No raised voice. No threat. Just truth. Nina watched the shift in their posture. Respect. Fear. Understanding. Vincent returned to his place at the head of the table. You want aggression? He said calmly. Earn it. Silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, one of the men nodded. We meant no disrespect. I know, Vincent replied. But understand this, he added quietly. Domestic peace doesn't weaken a man. It anchors him. His eyes flickered briefly toward Nina. And anchored men don't fall easily. Dinner resumed. The tone changed. By the time the last car pulled away from the estate, the narrative had shifted again. Inside the house, Nina exhaled slowly. You enjoyed that, she said. Vincent's mouth curved slightly. I reminded them. She stepped closer. You didn't have to threaten. I didn't. She tilted her head. You said vacancies. Yes, that's a threshin. He met her gaze. It's history. Upstairs, Lily practiced piano in the sitting room, her small fingers stumbling through a holiday melody. The notes weren't perfect, but they were persistent. Nina smiled faintly. They think you've changed, she said softly. I have, he replied, and that scares them. Good. She studied him carefully. You're not proving anything anymore, she said. No. Then why host the dinner? He stepped closer. Because strength that isn't demonstrated becomes rumor. She nodded slowly. And what are we? She asked again, echoing their earlier question. Vincent didn't hesitate. We're not a liability. We're not distraction. We're not leverage. He placed his hand lightly at her waist. We're foundation. The word settled deeply. Outside, snow began to fall lightly over Lake Michigan, coating the estate in quiet white. Inside, warmth filled the halls. Power remained intact. Respect recalibrated. And something else had solidified, not fear, not dominance. Confidence. The younger men left reminded. The older alliances remained steady, and Vincent no longer needed spectacle to maintain his position. He had something stronger now, stability, and a family he would protect, not out of strategy. but out of choice. By December, the city glittered with holiday lights. Michigan Avenue shimmered in gold and white. Storefront windows displayed curated perfection. Church bells carried through the cold air on Sunday mornings. For the first time in years, Vincent attended Mass. Not for optics, not for alliances. For Lily, she had insisted. "I want to sing in the Christmas choir," she'd said, her eyes bright with excitement and a little fear. "You'll stand the whole time?" Nina had asked gently. "Yes," Lily replied stubbornly. "I'm stronger now." Vincent hadn't argued. So on Christmas Eve, they sat in the third pew of a stone church near Lake Forest. Pine garlands wrapped the columns. Candles flickered softly in stained glass reflections. Nina noticed the way people looked at them, not with fear, curiosity, respect. Vincent didn't wear the wheelchair. He didn't need to. When Lily stepped forward with the other children to sing Silent Night, Nina felt her throat tighten. Vincent stood beside her, still, present. After the final hymn, as parishioners filtered outside into the snow-dusted night, an older man approached Vincent cautiously. "Mr. Moretti," he said respectfully. "It's good to see you here." Vincent nodded. "It's good to be here." No intimidation, no performance, just acknowledgement. In the car on the way home, Lily leaned back sleepily. "Did I do good?" she asked. "You did beautifully," Nina said warmly. Vincent glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You were steady," he added. "That matters more." At the estate, the fire was already lit. Mrs. Donatelli had prepared a late dinner roast, chicken, potatoes, warm bread. They ate quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand conversation. Later, after Lily fell asleep curled against a new blanket embroidered with her initials, Nina found Vincent alone in the study. He wasn't working. He was staring at the old wheelchair in the corner. "You're thinking," she said softly. "Yes." "About what?" He didn't answer immediately. "About who I was before the accident," he said finally. "And I thought strength meant being untouchable." She stepped closer. "And now? Now I know strength means standing back up." The admission lingered. "You tested Clara because you were afraid," Nina said gently. "Yes." "You married me because you were strategic." "Yes." "And you stayed because?" He met her gaze fully. "Because I didn't want to go back to who I was before." She studied him carefully. "You weren't cruel," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I was alone." Silence settled between them, warm and heavy. A knock interrupted it. Anthony stepped inside, unusually hesitant. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Vincent straightened slightly. "What is it?" Anthony handed him a file. "Ivers." Vincent's jaw tightened subtly. "He's moving assets offshore," Anthony explained. "Fast." "Retreating?" Nina asked. Anthony shook his head. "Repositioning." Vincent flipped through the file calmly. "He's planning something," Anthony added. "But I can't see the angle yet." Vincent closed the folder. "He's desperate," he said quietly. "Why?" Nina asked. "Because he tried to destabilize me," Vincent replied. "And failed." Anthony nodded. "Desperate men make bold moves." Vincent's eyes sharpened. "Then let him." Anthony hesitated. "There's a rumor," he said carefully. "He's considering a public play, something personal." Nina felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "Personal how?" Anthony didn't sugarcoat it. "Exposing the original contract." Silence fell hard. The torn pieces of paper were long gone, but the truth remained. "It would damage optics," Anthony continued. "Make it look like the marriage was a fraud." Vincent's expression didn't shift. "It started as a contract," he said calmly. "Yes," Nina agreed, "but it didn't stay one." Anthony looked between them. "The public won't care about nuance," he said. Vincent rose slowly. "I don't live for public approval." "No," Anthony agreed. "But you operate in a world where perception influences alliances." Nina stepped closer to Vincent. "If he exposes it," she said quietly, "we tell the truth." Anthony frowned slightly. "That could look weak." Vincent turned toward her. "Would it?" She met his gaze. "No." Anthony exhaled. "You're both serious." Vincent's voice was steady. "We don't hide from the truth." "And if he twists it?" Anthony pressed. "Then we correct it," Vincent replied. The word echoed from months before. Correction, not revenge, not denial. Correction. After Anthony left, Nina remained still. "You're not afraid?" she asked softly. Vincent stepped toward her. "No." "Why?" "Because we didn't build this on lies." She searched his face. "It did begin as leverage." "Yes. And we don't regret that?" He shook his head slightly. "No." "Why not?" "Because it brought me you." The simplicity of the answer silenced any lingering doubt. She moved into his arms slowly. Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet and steady. Inside the study, the fire crackled softly. "If he exposes it," she said quietly against his chest, "I won't be ashamed. You shouldn't be. I married you to save my daughter, and I married you to save my empire." She pulled back slightly, and we both ended up saving each other. He nodded once. "Yes." The next morning, Chicago woke to a headline. Leaked documents reveal Moretti marriage began as financial contract. It spread fast. Social media buzzed. Talk shows speculated. Commentators debated morality and manipulation. Anthony called before breakfast. "It's live," he said. Vincent didn't react. "Press conference?" Anthony asked. "No." Nina looked at him. "What then?" Vincent reached for her hand. "We go to Lily's school concert." Anthony blinked. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Vincent, we live," he said calmly, "and we don't apologize." By noon, cameras had gathered outside the estate gates, but Vincent didn't hide. He drove Nina and Lily himself to the school auditorium. No convoy, no spectacle. Inside, as Lily stood on stage again, stronger now, voice clear, Vincent and Nina sat side by side, hands intertwined, present. After the concert, reporters approached carefully. "Mr. Moretti," one called, "is it true your marriage began as a business arrangement?" Vincent didn't hesitate. "Yes." Gasps, cameras clicking. "And now?" another asked quickly. He looked at Nina. "Now it's not." Nina stepped forward slightly. "We began with survival," she said clearly. "We chose to stay." The reporters fell silent. No denial, no spin, just truth. And sometimes, truth disarmed more effectively than aggression ever could. The backlash lasted 48 hours, 2 days of headlines, 2 days of talk shows debating morality, loyalty, and whether love could grow from something transactional. 2 days of commentators dissecting Nina's past as a waitress and Vincent's reputation as a calculated power broker. Then the noise began to shift, not because of a press team, because of consistency. On the third morning after the leak, Vincent attended a scheduled charity board meeting for a veterans rehabilitation center he had quietly funded for years. He did not cancel. He did not reschedule. He did not hide. He walked in alone. When a reporter called out, "Mr. Moretti, any comment about the contract marriage?" Vincent paused briefly. "It was legal," he said evenly. "It was honest, and it's no longer relevant." He continued inside. That calm steadiness, no denial, no anger confused his critics. Nina, meanwhile, did something far more powerful. She went to work. Her small nonprofit, which had grown from a modest kitchen table project into a structured foundation supporting single parents with medical expenses, held its annual winter fundraiser that week. Some board members worried attendance would drop. It doubled. People came not out of scandal curiosity, but out of solidarity. A middle-aged woman approached Nina near the refreshment table, her hands trembling slightly. "My husband left when our son got sick," she said quietly. "I don't care how your marriage started. I care that you stayed." Nina swallowed emotion. "We both stayed," she replied gently. The woman nodded. "That's rare." Across the room, Vincent watched without intruding. He saw what he had almost lost years ago, community built on something deeper than fear. Anthony approached him discreetly. "Public opinion's shifting," he murmured. "They're calling it unconventional, but real." Vincent didn't smile. He simply observed Nina speaking with donors, her posture confident, her voice steady. "They respect strength," Anthony continued. Vincent corrected him quietly. "They respect honesty." That evening, a far more serious development unfolded. Anthony received word that Marcus Ivers was facing federal scrutiny. Offshore transfers flagged. Anonymous tips submitted. Investigations opening quietly. Vincent hadn't moved against him, not directly, but other competitors had taken note of Ivers's overreach. Predators sense weakness, and Ivers had exposed his hand too boldly. Anthony entered the study that night. He's under review, he said. Vincent looked up calmly. By who? 3 agencies. Separate angles. Vincent closed the ledger in front of him. I didn't initiate that. I know. Nina stood near the window, listening. Will he assume you did? She asked. Yes, Anthony answered before Vincent could. Vincent's expression remained measured. He made the first move, he said. The city responds. Anthony hesitated. He might lash out. Vincent stood. Not at us. How can you be sure? Because he's fighting to survive now. Nina turned slowly. And desperate men? Vincent met her gaze. Turn inward. 2 days later, Marcus Ivers requested a meeting. Not public. Private. Anthony advised against it. It could be a trap, he said. Vincent shook his head. He won't risk escalation. Why? Nina asked. Because he's under watch, Vincent replied. He can't afford spectacle. The meeting was arranged at a neutral downtown office building. No entourage. No intimidation. Vincent entered alone. Ivers stood by the window when he arrived. He looked older, tired. You're calm, Ivers said without greeting. Vincent took a seat. You're not. Ivers exhaled sharply. You played the long game. No, Vincent replied evenly. You overplayed yours. Ivers studied him. You could have destroyed me months ago. Yes. Why didn't you? Vincent held his gaze. Because I don't chase ego battles. A bitter laugh escaped Ivers. You let the city do it. The city corrects imbalance, Vincent said calmly. Silence stretched. I thought exposing the contract would break you, Ivers admitted. It didn't. No. Ivers studied him carefully. You're different. Vincent didn't deny it. I am. You used to respond with force. And now? Now you respond with control. Vincent leaned back slightly. Control lasts longer. Ivers' shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. You win, he said quietly. Vincent's voice remained steady. This isn't about winning. Everything's about winning in our world. No, Vincent said. It's about survival. Ivers' jaw tightened. And what does survival look like to you? Vincent didn't hesitate. Stability. The word lingered between them. Ivers finally nodded once. I won't push again. Good. Vincent rose. One more thing, Ivers added. Vincent paused. She stood by you. Nina. Yes, Vincent replied. Ivers shook his head slowly. I underestimated that. So did I, Vincent said quietly. When Vincent returned home, snow had begun falling again. The estate looked almost untouched, white and still. Nina waited in the entry hall. You met him. Yes. And? It's finished. For real? Yes. She searched his face carefully. No threats? No. No conditions? No. She stepped closer. What changed? Vincent removed his coat slowly. He realized power isn't loud anymore. And you? I realized it never needed to be. Upstairs, Lily's voice carried faintly as she practiced piano again, more confident now. Fewer missed notes. Nina smiled softly. She's stronger. Yes. So are we. Vincent stepped toward her. We were tested. And we didn't fracture. She rested her hand against his chest. The contract. Yes. It's public now. Yes. And we're still here. He placed his hand over hers. We chose to stay. Later that evening, Vincent gathered Anthony and the senior members of his organization. The narrative is settled, Anthony reported. Markets stabilized. Alliances intact. Vincent nodded once. We don't retaliate, he said clearly. We don't escalate. Anthony raised an eyebrow slightly. No? No. He looked around the room. We build. The men exchanged glances. Build what? One asked. Vincent's tone was steady. Legitimacy. That word would have been unthinkable from him years ago. But times change. Men evolve. And power, when anchored properly, can transform without collapsing. As the meeting ended, Anthony lingered. You're closing a chapter, he observed. Yes. Feels different. It is. Anthony nodded slowly. Good different. Vincent didn't respond verbally, but his expression softened. That night, he found Nina on the terrace despite the cold, wrapped in a wool coat, watching the lake. You should be inside, he said gently. I like the quiet. He joined her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Are you at peace? She asked softly. Vincent considered the question carefully. I'm at clarity. She smiled faintly. That's close enough. He slipped his arm around her. I used to think survival meant eliminating threats, he said. And now? Now I know survival means protecting what matters. She leaned into him. And what matters? He didn't hesitate. You, Lily, this. The snow fell quietly around them. Chicago continued to move, to shift, to compete. But inside the Moretti estate, something permanent had settled. Not invincibility, not perfection, but certainty. Spring arrived gently, not with spectacle, but with thaw. The ice along Lake Michigan loosened first. Snow retreated into thin gray edges along the estate's long driveway. Buds appeared quietly on trees that had seemed lifeless only weeks before. Change did not announce itself. It unfolded. Vincent stood on the terrace one early morning, coffee in hand, watching sunlight ripple across the water. 3 years had passed since that night in the ballroom, since Nina's quiet, steady, yes. 3 years since survival had been the only objective. Now survival was no longer the question. Dad. Lily's voice carried from inside the house. Vincent turned instinctively. She wasn't supposed to run, but she did. Down the hallway, across the marble floor, through the open terrace doors, careful but confident, her braces lighter now, almost unnecessary. I did it, she announced breathlessly. Nina followed at a measured pace, smiling. She walked from the stairs to the kitchen without holding the rail. Nina explained. Pride unmistakable. Vincent crouched slightly, steadying Lily's shoulders. On your own? He asked. Lily nodded fiercely. See? I told you I'm not breakable. Vincent felt something tighten in his chest. Neither am I, he said quietly. Nina heard it. She always did. Later that afternoon, the estate hosted a small gathering, not a show of power, not a calculated dinner, just family and a handful of trusted allies. Anthony arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine. Hard to believe it's been 3 years, he said, glancing toward Nina with a knowing look. Vincent nodded. It feels longer. In a good way. Anthony clarified. Yes, Vincent agreed. Mrs. Donatelli fussed over table settings on the terrace. The air smelled of rosemary and grilled lamb. Lake wind carried faint warmth. No tension, no undercurrent of threat, just presence. Clara did not attend. She had moved to New York quietly months earlier. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public scenes. Some lessons are learned privately. Marcus Ivers had resigned from 2 corporate boards under quiet investigation. He had not contacted Vincent again. The city had recalibrated. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, Nina stood beside Vincent near the edge of the terrace. Do you miss it? She asked softly. Miss what? The intensity. He considered the question. No, not even a little. No, he said again, more certain. She studied his profile. You don't feel smaller? He turned toward her fully. I feel anchored. The word fit differently now. Stronger. Anthony approached them quietly. There's something I've been meaning to say, he began. Vincent raised an eyebrow slightly. That's rare. Anthony smirked faintly. You changed the structure, he said. Of what? Everything. Vincent didn't respond immediately. Anthony continued. You moved operations into cleaner channels. You cut loose unnecessary risks. You invested in legitimate partnerships. He glanced at Nina. You stabilized. Vincent looked out at the lake again. Stability is underrated. Anthony nodded slowly. Some of the younger guys are calling it evolution. Vincent's lips curved faintly. Let them. Inside, Lily's laughter rang out as she tried to teach one of the kitchen staff a simple piano tune. Nina watched through the open doors. She's growing up fast. Yes. Does that scare you? Vincent paused. Yes. Why? Because I can't control everything. She smiled gently. You never could. He looked at her. I tried. I know. They stood in quiet understanding. As twilight settled, Anthony gathered everyone's attention. I have a toast, he announced. Vincent gave him a skeptical look. Keep it short. Anthony ignored him. To Vincent, he said, who once believed power meant control. A few quiet chuckles. And to Nina, he added, turning toward her. Who showed him power could also mean trust. The room softened. Anthony lifted his glass. To choosing to stay. Glasses clinked gently. Vincent didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. After dinner, as guests departed one by one, Nina remained seated on the terrace steps, shoes off, bare feet against cool stone. Vincent joined her. "You're quiet," she observed. "I'm thinking, dangerous." He almost smiled. "I used to believe betrayal defined me," he said quietly. "And now? Now I know it refined me." She tilted her head. "Refined? It forced me to see who I was without armor." She reached for his hand. And I didn't like that man. "You're not him anymore." "No." Silence fell comfortably. "Do you regret anything?" she asked softly. He considered it carefully. "Yes." She waited. "I regret that it took losing control to learn what matters." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Most people don't learn at all." He exhaled slowly. "The contract," he said. "Yes. It saved us. And it also tested us." She nodded. "Would you erase it?" "No," he answered, without hesitation. "Why?" "Because it led to truth." Inside, Lily padded onto the terrace in slippers. "Are we still having cake?" she asked sleepily. Vincent stood and offered his hand. "Always." They went inside together. The cake was simple vanilla, white frosting, no extravagance, just enough. As Lily blew out 3 candles, Nina had insisted on placing at the center one for each year since that ballroom night. Vincent watched the flame smoke curl upward. 3 years, 3 winters survived, 3 springs earned. Later, when the house grew quiet and Lily slept deeply upstairs, Nina and Vincent returned once more to the terrace. The lake was calm, the city distant. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "Yes." "What do you remember most?" He didn't hesitate. "Your voice." "Not the humiliation." "No." "Not Clara?" "No." "What then?" "You saying yes." She smiled faintly. "I was terrified. So was I. And now?" He turned toward her fully. "Now I'm certain." She searched his eyes. "About what?" "That love doesn't arrive perfectly," he said quietly. "It arrives honestly." The wind moved gently across the water. "I married you to protect my empire," he continued. "And I married you to save my daughter." He took her hands carefully. "And somewhere between strategy and survival, we found something stronger." She nodded slowly. "Choice." "Yes." He pressed his forehead lightly against hers. "We chose to stay. And we keep choosing. Every day. Not out of obligation, not out of contract, but out of conviction." Inside the house, the old wheelchair remained stored in a quiet corner of the study. Untouched, not erased, just no longer central. The city would continue to test men like Vincent Moretti. Power would shift. Alliances would evolve. But he no longer feared instability. Because the foundation was no longer built on control, it was built on trust, on truth, on 2 people who had begun as strangers bound by survival and ended as partners bound by choice, and in the quiet after everything, that was stronger than any empire. This story reminds us that love does not always begin in perfection. It often begins in survival. What starts as strategy can become sincerity, and what looks like weakness can reveal the deepest kind of strength. True partnership is not built on appearances, pride, or control, but on the daily decision to stay when leaving would be easier. Betrayal may wound us, but it can also refine us, teaching us who we are without armor. In the end, real power is not dominance over others. It is the courage to be honest, to be vulnerable, and to choose love with open eyes. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.